Hey, Birchouse friends, welcome back. Before we get started, I want to let you know Birchouse has entered the modern age, and we have a TikTok now. You can find us at Birchouse. Let's get to today's question, which comes from Robert, who asks, "Hey, Birchouse, how do you make things look historical?" This was an interesting question. I'm not sure I quite understood it, so I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. If I didn't answer your question correctly, um, please let me know, and we'll come back around on this subject. But let's just take it from the point of aesthetics, actually looking historical. Um, my best advice to anybody that wants to build something and make it look like it came from the period that they're trying to represent is to not sweat the small stuff. Um, I used to get really hung up on fine details. If I was painting something and maybe my paint line was a little raggedy, I'd want to go in with a paintbrush and kind of, clean it up and get a nice clean line. Um, if I was, say, putting studs in a canabo and one stud was a little bit off from the others, I'd pry it out and I'd sand the wood and then I'd replace it and try and get nice and even with the rest of the studs. Um, if maybe there's some kind of imperfection, a little nick in the wood or a divot in the wood, I'd go in and I'd sand it and get flat and try and get everything a nice, even look across the face of the shield. And I got hung up on the details, things that probably nobody else would notice, but I sure notice, and I think a lot of artisans are like that. They know where they've made some kind of little error or something that isn't quite perfect that nobody else notices. Um, there's a great episode of King of the Hill where Luann has a puppet show and Hank builds her a stage for her puppet show. And during her first performance, he realizes that one of the nails isn't hammered in all the way. It's like it needs like one more hammer pound. And it becomes his focus during the show. He begins to stress out about it, and he's sweating, and he thinks the other men are judging him for not having it, having that nail, having that craftsmanship perfect. And I think a lot of artisans are like that. The problem with being a perfectionist or trying to get a nice perfect look is twofold. Firstly, it you begin to look factory. When you begin to try and make everything look perfect, it begins to lose its personality. It doesn't look made by a person with their hands. It looks like it came from a factory. Um, those little imperfections are what make a thing look like they're made by a human person. Um, and the second problem is it does not reflect uh, history. If you've spent as much time as I have looking at photos of shields and historic items, getting on websites for like the Met and the British Museum and the Royal Armouries Museum and any museum that has the goods that you're trying to build, and you really start to look at those items, you begin to realize there's all kinds of flaws in those items. Um, like we did a Targe for the Swordsmanship Museum Academy, and we took one from the Royal Armories Museum, if I can enunciate. And the longer I spent looking at it as I was building their shield, the more I was like, man, there's stuff all out, all kind of studs out of place all over the place, or things that the measurement between them is off. Um, even things made for royals, you'll see paint lines that are straight and they kind of bow out for a second and kind of come back in. Um, and so it's not, when you're trying to be a perfectionist, it's not reflective of the time period you're trying to represent. And I think that really just comes from these were items made by people, freehanding the build, freehanding the decoration, and being made for people who were going to use those items. Um, and so I brought a Targe with me today because we kind of brought it up, and this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. And you notice the cross pieces, the cross that's built from these studs. You know, these three look pretty good, but this one kind of bows out a little bit. This one line, and it really bothers me. And I really focus on it. But it's reflective of a time period. Little sawdust in the air. It's reflective of the time period. So now I don't get hung up on the small stuff. If I have a line that's maybe a tiny bit raggedy, I'll leave it alone. I won't go and try and fix it. You know, if I have a stud that's off by 1 or 2, I won't fix it because it's reflective of the time. It makes it look handmade. Makes it look historical. That's not to say I go on my way to do those things. I freehand my decoration, and I don't sweat the small stuff. If something is really egregious, I'll go in and fix it, obviously. And I think it's really important not to try to make it look historical. If you do that, you're going to have it look fake. But also, don't try to fix every tiny little tiny mistake. And what you'll end up with is a product that looks like it came from a time period where people built things with their hands for people who use those things. I hope I answered your question. Again, if I didn't, please let me know. That was a great question. Thank you so much for asking. If you ever have a question for Birchouse, comment below with "Hey Birchouse," ask, and we'll answer it in a future video. In the meantime, we'll see you all next Wednesday.